Welcome back. It is exactly 8:45 a.m. and we now are going to be talking with Narendh Ganesh. He can only give us 10 minutes of his very valuable time, but I think in that time we can tackle a very important issue, and that is clearing the air. The South African Human Rights Commission report has stated no evidence of a link between unrest and former President Jacob Zuma's incarceration. And we do know that it was absolute mayhem when the riots happened here in South Africa uh, during that time. Narendh Ganesh is an activist and he is going to talk to us about that matter. Very good morning to you. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, ma'am. Thank you for having me.
Are you shocked at that finding, the report by the SAHRC? I must say, it took me aback. Your thoughts, being an activist yourself, and I should imagine being, you probably live very close to Phoenix. You are based in KZN, and we know what the situation was like in Phoenix at the time.
Yes, the exact word shocked. Yes, I do live in an area contiguous to Phoenix. And yes, my area was attacked violently on the night of the 15th of July 2021. The idea behind this investigation by the South African Human Rights Commission was to establish the fact. Obviously, one has to look back at the time when the former president was incarcerated, for contempt of court. And that was probably the stimulus or the impetus and catalyst to actually get people mobilized into action. Now, the point that is critical here, what was a political matter became a criminal matter, and eventually it was made out to become a racial matter in the context of Phoenix. And in my candid opinion, this was an entire waste of time, money, and energy. I also rendered evidence at the commission, and I was so very disappointed in its final report in that there was no conclusive evidence reached. But the circumstances that prevailed at the time had so many factors involved, and that is why perhaps the evidence that was led by both the victims and people that were involved in the violence at the time had many contradictions, and as a result, the report was not as conclusive as one would have liked it to be.
What would you what would you personally, being an activist yourself, what would you like to have seen coming out of this report? And that doesn't suggest that a report such as this would hold people criminally liable or not.
Yes, it would have been prudent to have had people criminally liable because there was many acts of criminality that occurred. And one of the aspects of the report indicated that crime intelligence had reports that something was in the offing. And further to that, it was stated that it was found that the South African police services were not adequately equipped or informed as to how to handle such a critical situation because it was, it was bordering on anarchy, if not an insurrection, because it had very political undertones that manifested itself into criminality. And the very fact that they took a community that is predominantly or historically Indian and made it into a racial aspect is very disturbing because no matter how much we want to look at social cohesion, uh, this will forever remain a scar on the history of South Africa. And it worries me because uh, if we don't tackle the root cause and finger people who are trying to destabilize the country, we will have repeated incidents like this. And where does it stop?
Now, we do know that in August last year, the brothers Dylan and Ned Govender were sentenced to 7 years imprisonment for assault and attempted murder for the violent acts they supposedly committed during the unrest in the Palm View area of Phoenix. To your knowledge, are these the only people that have been incarcerated? What about all of the other people? We do know that this insurrection left above of 300 people dead, and it has cost the country billions of rands due to obviously the damaged infrastructure. So that's the one question. And then let's also look, I'm going to add this onto my question. I'd like you to respond. At the same time, when all of this was playing out, social media had been awash with inflammatory remarks directed um, to, I guess, the judiciary and also the ruling party who supported the jailing of the former president. Some of those posts came from Zuma's own daughter, Duduzile Zuma Sambudla, whose tweets were viewed by many analysts and commentators as inflammatory and in support of the violence. So, on the one hand, we have these two working class brothers, Indian working class brothers from Phoenix, who have been incarcerated. I think they're serving 7 years in prison. And on the other hand, you have Zuma's daughter and his son, Duduzane, has also been implicated, but they seem to be untouchable.
Yeah, that's a disturbing aspect, and we must remember that not a single person of any race, has ever been convicted of murder during the unrest period of July 2021, and that's critical because uh, the law enforcement, they were able to arrest a whole series of people, especially Indian men from Phoenix, but none of them were actually fingered, convicted for murder. The attempted murder charges are, as I'm to understand, under appeal. So we're not sure what that might reveal in the end. And yes, I was privy to some of the posts by Zuma's children, and they were very intimidating, they were very inflammatory, and they were very inciting. And it would have been prudent for the law enforcement agencies, crime intelligence, to have actually investigated that. Perhaps they were fearful that it might escalate or exacerbate a very volatile situation. But if we are going to continue on that vein, that we are fearful of certain people in this country, then where does law and order start and end? The judiciary itself, obviously, they don't investigate the matter, they hear the matter. But our crime intelligence, our South African police services, the whole security cluster that is responsible for the stability and well-being of the country was so very inadequate that it brought on a lot of speculation. And it would be important, be it, and notwithstanding that the Zuma children belong to a former president, but at the end of the day, they fueled the fire. And instead of taking the responsible step of alleviating the tensions, the violence, the looting, the criminality, they merely exacerbated the issue. And it is sad that no action has been taken thus far. And it's gone on to 3 years, almost 3 years now. So, yeah, there's a manifestation of so many factors that is deliberately degenerating this country. And it's sad that these brothers had to be indicted. But if they are guilty, and I said this before and I'll say it now, if anyone is guilty of criminality resulting in the death of another person, they must be brought to book. They must follow due process. But speculation, conjecture merely exacerbates, merely fuels fire in a country that does not require such conjecture.
And we do know during the time of the riots or the insurrection, call it what you will, it was a very dark day or a dark few days in the history of South Africa. Something that should never have happened, but happened nonetheless. Upwards of 300 other people were killed in that time. but as you rightly say, no one else has been brought to book. So the fact that these two brothers, whether they were guilty or not, whether it was a situation of self-defense, whether whatever the motive is, I'm kind of thinking putting these type of narratives out in the mainstream media is very definitely stoking racial tensions, something that we don't need in South Africa. How do you suppose, let's suppose those boys, the brothers, were guilty. How do you suppose the narrative could have been put out in the press, knowing that the SAHRC is a Chapter 9 institution, and we hope that they'd be very responsible in the reports that they put out?
Look, in many respects, I think the report was trying to palliate on for both sides in many respects. But if these gentlemen were guilty of any criminality, especially murder, then it should have been put out. But you rightly say that there were over 300, I think it was 356 deaths
Mm,
reported countrywide, both in Gauteng and KZN. And we must remember, and I just want to digress a moment, when I gave my evidence, I referred to the fact that the terminology that was being bandied around at the time was the Phoenix massacre.
mm,
And I questioned the commission to investigate that bodies that were brought to the Phoenix mortuary, were they actually confirmed to be that of people who were actually killed as a result of the unrest? Because at that particular time, the Gale Street mortuary, which is the main mortuary in KZN, especially at Equini, was closed. And Phoenix police, Phoenix being the regional mortuary, many bodies were brought from hospitals. Was the body count actually correct? And I haven't heard a single statement to that effect. So the whole scenario or the narrative would have changed had it been actually found that somebody was fingered. In But that would not necessarily, one swallow doesn't make a summer. So if we had to cast everybody with the same brush or paint everybody with the same brush, then it would be unfair for those who are not guilty but to be fingered in the same process. And I think the Human Rights Commission desperately fell short in actually finding the root causes. They were very loath in trying to equate the Zuma incident to the actual events in Phoenix. But it was a domino effect. One led to the other to the other. And all it needed was a country of security that should have been up to speed in preventing such a horrible situation from occurring.
So where to from here, Naren? I mean, please God, we never ever want to see a repeat of the insurrection in what was it, 2021. Let's not forget that the unemployment situation is sitting at critical levels in our country, and we know that that could be a spark that could start a huge fire with the upcoming elections. So what happens now to this report, of all the time and money wasted in putting this report together, which clearly seems to be unsatisfactory? It hasn't been investigated properly, or deeply enough. What about all of the billions of rands lost in damaged infrastructure? What about, at one point we were hearing things like SASRIA is there, SASRIA will bail the people out regarding insurance so that they can at least recoup some of their losses. And then in the very next breath, we heard that SASRIA themselves were almost on a point of bankruptcy. So how do we move forward 3 years later? Has the infrastructure been fixed? Is there money? What about the billions promised by government to help as well? Where are we in the murkiness of all of this drama?
The word you used last, murkiness, is absolutely true. Look, the whatever was lost during 2021, I don't think that is recoverable in many respects. The infrastructure, to a great extent, has been restored, but I think the greater aspect that we need to consider is where does South Africa move from here? Because this racial tension that occurred during that period, the ironic part is the moment everything was quelled, people went about their lives as normal. But,
Mm,
as human beings, in a subconscious way, we hold this kind of, I wouldn't like to use the word, but if I can just use it to explain what I'm saying, they hold this revenge against the other side. We are so
mm,
steeped in racialism and
mm,
polarization that people look at the other side as suspicious. Yet our constitution speaks to we the people. It does not racially classify us. Yet we are ironically so highly racially inclined these days. I think it's incumbent upon leaders, whether it's community, religious, social, political leaders, to start engendering or fostering this idea that we all are living the same life in one country, in the most beautiful country in the world. We should not be looking at each other in difference, but in similarity. And the moment
mm.
we start that, especially at grassroots level, from the schools, we hopefully we might not, when we're not here, this country might be a little better than the one we entered it. And I'm hopeful. I've always remained positive. It's up to leadership and all the monies and whatever Sasria had to say and stuff like that. I do not hold too much, hold my breath on that. The report, like you said, was not satisfactory. It did not address adequately the actual problems, but solutions is what we need. Rather than we have to look back to look ahead. Unfortunately, in these
Mm.
circumstances, and I think the lessons learned need to be addressed and acted upon.
My final question then to you is, uh, does it now mean, now that the SAHRC has published this report, that that is the end of the matter, shut, closed, forgotten, and move on? Or is there more work to be done? Is there, is it meaningful for another inquiry to be happening? Or do you think it's just shut the door on this unsatisfactory report? Let's move on with our lives. There's an election to contend with this year. Let's hope and pray that we get credible, ethical leaders that take the country forward.
This is termed the final report that has to be presented to Parliament. I'm not sure if it's going to serve the purpose of uh, uh,
Closure. I think that's what people are. Some form of closure, some form of understanding why, when, how. I think that's what people need, isn't it?
yeah. Look, closure is a veritable term. Sometimes you do not understand how some people want closure.
Mm, mm.
It's become a cliche term, but uh, on the realistic aspect, how much do we close of the issue when it will always be an open wound? All it needs is to just open the door and you'll see the wound there. I think
Oh,
it's important to move ahead because a lot of people have suffered heartache in their lives and have had to move on. But critically, in a country that has got the racial tag associated with it, I think, sometimes it's prudent to let sleeping dogs lie. It's going to cost a lot of money again, and who is going to investigate it, and at what point? The families of the victims are obviously aggrieved and will be till the end of time. How do we change that? Does money compensate the loss of life? I don't think so. But be that as it may, I'm hopeful that if this report serves no purpose, the only aspect of it is that we cannot and must not have a repeat of this ever again in the history of South Africa.
absolutely. Please, God, let us not be witness to something like this again. Narendh, Ganesh, thank you indeed for your time and your insights. God bless and take care.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for having me.
It is exactly 4 after 9 o'clock. News and views on Salam Media. We're going to be moving along into the second hour of the show. And this is where we do welcome our Polokwane listeners on One Nation FM. Please do keep us company for the rest of this hour.